It is a very exciting time to be in the technology space, and it is a very exciting time to be in the Internet of Things. We're in an environment where we're moving from 20 or 30 billion connected devices today, easily doubling that in the next just 4 or 5 years. And I'm sure we'll hear more from Cisco, who has provided frequent statistics on the growth of IoT and the growth of the network. And it's a very exciting time to be in the technology environment and the Internet of Things in France, because we are seeing tremendous growth in France. At the International CES, which we hold every year in Las Vegas, we have seen a significant growth in the number of attendees from France and in the number of exhibitors from France. There's a tremendous amount of innovation today coming out of France, and it's a very exciting time to be here to witness that and to see the growth of innovation coming from France. In 2007, Apple launched the original iPhone. And it's noteworthy because for the first time we started to see sensors show up in consumer-facing devices. Apple, with the original iPhone, built the iPhone with an accelerometer. The accelerometer at the time was designed to change the orientation of that device so that you could take your phone and you could go from landscape to portrait. That was essentially all that the accelerometer was designed to do at that time. The App Store was still closed to third-party developers and would be for almost another year. But it was noteworthy because we started to put into the hands of consumers sensors. Prior to this time, we were using accelerometers to do things like deploy airbags and control other systems, but all of these were happening in the background of consumers. A year prior to that launch, Nintendo launched the Wiimote, and the Wiimote used that same technology, the accelerometer, to essentially digitize the physical space around the user so that you could take the physical motion of the user, digitize it, and then incorporate it into the game. So we were beginning about 10 years ago to start to put sensors into the hands of consumers. And that essentially is the Internet of Things. To digitize an environment, to sensorize an environment, and then to connect it so that we could utilize that information elsewhere. It builds on a long history of innovation, a long history of technology. We have been looking at data for literally hundreds of years, thousands of years we've been thinking about data. But it is only now that we've started to digitize it, to embed sensors that could digitize it on our behalf, and then incorporate it into our everyday objects. It's some of the trends that I talked about in a book that was published last year called Digital Destiny. And in that I talk about 5 key themes to this world of data, world defined by data. We see ubiquitous computing. We got our first digital computer in 1942, the ABC, but it would not be until the 1980s that we began to see computer become ubiquitous. In fact, as late as 2000, only about 40% of the developed world had home computers. And the majority of us were on dial-up. Even in the United States and throughout Europe, only about 3% of households were on broadband connectivity. Today, the exact opposite is true. The majority of those who have internet in their home are on broadband connectivity. And that relates to, obviously, to point 3. Point 2, the cheap digital storage. 1956, IBM introduced the very first original hard drive, but it wouldn't be until the 90s that that would become ubiquitous, and that we would think about storage as being unlimited. In fact, today most of us are probably surprised when we get a notification that we've run out of storage. And what do we do when we run out of storage? We simply move digital information to somewhere else. We put it on the cloud, we get a bigger hard drive. Rarely do we go on and delete that information. But that was very common just a few short years ago. We would go in and we would clear out our hard drives. We would delete documents that we don't need. We would delete folders or files or photos. And today we just push it to the cloud. We push it to another hard drive. We've also seen, as part of this push towards digital data and digital information, the proliferation of digital devices. 1981, we got our first digital consumer device that would become ubiquitous and really would drive to the mass market. That was the CD player, one of the first digital products outside of the computer. But it wouldn't be until 1998 that we would see our second digital product. That's when we launched digital television. And then, in quick succession, we began to replace all of our analog products with digital ones. 2001, we saw the iPod introduced. 2003, we saw the very first smartphone. We replaced analog cameras with digital cameras. Slowly, over time, we replaced all of these devices with digital devices. And now we're replacing all of these physical analog objects with digital ones. We're replacing our thermostats. We're replacing our door locks. We're replacing all of these things. And if you came to CES in January, or if you're planning to come in 2017, you'll see that the Internet of Things is showing up everywhere in very, very interesting places. And really the push towards the Internet of Things is all driven by these last 3 points: digitization, connection, sensorization. It's hard to find products today that aren't digital, connected, and have embedded in them sensors. And as a result, we're able to digitize our physical space. You can see the photo of a surfer. It looks like a regular surfer, but on the front of his surfboard is a sensor unit. And in that sensor unit is a gyroscope and a accelerometer, many of the same sensors that you find in your mobile phone today. And by embedding those into the surfboard, we're able to digitize all the information around that physical space. How big the wave was, how long he rode the wave, how fast he was going, where he did his bottom turns, all of that information, which was already there, but just wasn't being captured in a systematic way, is able to be then incorporated into that experience. So he might be able to get real-time feedback on where he did his bottom turns, when he took off for the wave, and get feedback on how he might adjust that experience. And as a result of us digitizing this environment, it changes the experience that surfer has. It could change everything else around it. It could change the experience that other surfers have. It could change surf competitions. Recently, as many of you probably know, in the United States, Apple and FBI and our FBI, our law enforcement, were involved in a very delicate court matter where the FBI wanted Apple to unlock a certain phone used by a group of terrorists in the United States, and Apple refused to do so. On the surface, that looks like that's a mobile phone story about a very specific device, but it has much broader ramifications about how the Internet of Things will incorporate into our lives and how the Internet of Things information, digitized information, can become available. We're starting to digitize the physical space around things like babies. This looks like a regular baby, what we would call a baby onesie, but you can see incorporated in it is that little green turtle, and in that green turtle is a digital microphone, so you can hear the noise around the baby. You can hear sounds around the baby. You could hear the baby crying. It has Bluetooth, so it sends all of that information to your mobile phone. It has an accelerometer and a gyroscope, just like your mobile phone does, just like the Nintendo Wiimote did in 2006. And so you can tell whether the baby is on its stomach, whether it's on its back, whether it's awake, whether it's asleep. You can tell because of the stripes across its chest, which connect to the accelerometer, whether it's breathing or not. And so all of that information can then be relayed to your mobile phone, or in the future, probably relayed to other systems. So that if the baby started crying, maybe the lights go on. If the baby got too hot, that measures the temperature around the baby as well. Then you could adjust the temperature in the room. So all of the information that we're digitizing now will start to connect to broader systems. The last decade we have spent digitizing these environments. The next decade will be defined by adoption of these technologies and then integration into these broader systems. The key with all of this is, does it matter? Do any of us care if we can digitize the information of our surf session or digitize the information around our babies? So if it doesn't incorporate change back into the physical world, it probably is not something that will resonate with us. This is the way I talk about it in the book. You take an analog activity, you then digitize that information, but if it doesn't influence the decisions you start to make, if it doesn't influence change, it's probably not something that's going to resonate with consumers. So today we talk a lot about, is this a great device? We look at something like the smartwatch and we say, is this a good device? But what we should be asking is, does the internet on the wrist make sense? Does it make sense to put the internet on our wrist? And if so, what are the use case scenarios? And that is the fundamental question that we are asking about every single digitized, connected, sensorized object that enters the Internet of Things sphere. Does the internet make sense in your shower head? Does it make sense in your faucet? Does it make sense in your door lock? Does it make sense in your refrigerator? And if the internet makes sense in your refrigerator, what are the use case scenarios? What's the information that can be ascertained, and how can that information be used? So as you bring Internet of Things applications to market, ask that fundamental question. Does the internet make sense here? And if it does, what are the use case scenarios look like? And by doing that, we're allowing for a host of new applications, and we're really starting to change the way we interact. You could take something like transparent LCDs, which convey tremendous amounts of information that could be tied to all types of systems happening in the background. So in closing, I just will wrap up by highlighting that the way we talk to our systems, to these systems, has started to change. Originally, we used things like punch cards, and then slowly over time, we moved them to interact more like us. We use things like a mouse. We started to create these hybrid languages. You might recognize the graffiti language used by Palm, where it looks like the letters that we use in the Roman alphabet, but not quite. We start to use voice and gesture, and this is the environment that we're moving into now, where the way we interact with computing is much more akin to the way we interact with each other. And as a result, we start to introduce entirely new systems of communications. One of the defining features of the Apple Watch was that you could send your heartbeat to other people. Do we care that we can do that? Is that something we want to do? We don't know yet. But if it is, and if it is meaningful, then it will change the way that we communicate with each other. And so maybe I'll close there by highlighting that the Internet of Things is not just about connecting door locks, connecting our refrigerators, connecting all of these diverse objects. It's also about influencing the lives that we live. It's about influencing the way we interact with each other. And I think that's one of the things that will become pronounced in the decade to come, is how all of these things impact society and how they impact the way that we interact. What are the broad societal implications for something like connected cars and driverless cars? On the surface, it looks like a vehicle that you have connected, you've digitized, you've added sensors, it fits in within that Internet of Things paradigm, but more broadly, it has broad implications for society, and I think that's where we'll start to focus. Thank you very much.